Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new video review. Today we'll be taking a look at Star Fox Zero. I have been waiting for around 11 years for a brand new Star Fox console game, so finally it's here. But was it worth the wait? Well, let's find out now, Fox. Star Fox Zero has been quite a controversial game since it was first announced. One of the big reasons of that is because the game introduces a new control scheme never been done in a Star Fox game before that requires heavily motion controls from the Wii U gamepad. There was also later controversies about the graphics and visual presentation of the game that eventually got a little bit more updated throughout the process, and I think in the end the game does look pretty good. Let's start off with the story. Star Fox Zero's story is basically the same story as Star Fox 64. So you might say, is it a remaster of that game? Not entirely, because even though it's the same story, there's a completely new perspective of that story. In essence, the story feels like someone else that lived through the events of Star Fox 64 decided to tell the events in another different way. So if you're really hoping for some really unique story or some really unique dialogue, you won't see it here. There's actually a lot of similar dialogue also to Star Fox 64, even some of the jokes and reactions between the characters. That's not to say the story doesn't have its surprises. The game does have a lot of surprises, and I did like that in some ways the story of this game actually develops more a few things that were not well explained in Star Fox 64. They made a more developed villain with Andross this time around, explaining a little bit of what was he planning all this time, what was his ultimate goal. But aside from that, you get a lot of the same elements, even the same guest starring characters from Star Fox 64, but this time you meet them under very different circumstances than the last time. Now let's talk about the gameplay. Ignoring for a moment the controls, the game does play very similar to Star Fox 64. You got your on-rail R-Wing missions, and you have your open wings missions where you can explore around the area to take down enemies. You also have the return of the Landmaster, which to me is still my favorite vehicle of the Star Fox games. And it does play in the same similar way, except that it has now a new twist. Now the Landmaster can transform into a small ship that can fly around for a limited time, which is actually a nice touch. But apart from that, we also get new vehicles never before seen. One of them is the Walker. The Walker originally was gonna be in Star Fox 2 for the Super Nintendo, but unfortunately that game got cancelled, so Miyamoto decided to bring back this vehicle finally on Star Fox Zero. Unfortunately, the Walker I think is my least favorite vehicle in the game. While I think it's a very neat idea, it has the most troublesome controls from all the other vehicles in the game. And it's not entirely because of the controls' fault, but because it's not actually a very responsive vehicle like it should be. Particularly when you're trying to do a barrel roll, the vehicle tends to have a bit of seconds of delay that ultimately make the barrel roll useless. And turning around on it can be a little uncomfortable. Thankfully, the Walker is not a vehicle that you have to use a lot in the game. There's portions when you only have to use it for a few seconds, and then you can transform back into the R-Wing. So in that sense, I think it's a great vehicle in the sense that you can transform back to the R-Wing, or you can go to the Walker and you can make some great combinations all together with the transformations. That is also great in some very important battles later on in the game, like going against Starwolf and of course Andross himself. In those moments, the Walker really does shine as a vehicle that's useful. Aside from the Walker, there's also the Gyro Wing. The Gyro Wing is a nice change of pace of vehicle because it's actually a very slower vehicle and it provides a bit of element of stealth. My only complaint about the Gyro Wing itself is that it's barely used in the game. There's around only 2 levels where you can use the Gyro Wing, and you can skip entirely using the Gyro Wing if you choose an alternate route in the game. For example, one of the levels that uses the Gyro Wing, if you play through another route, you'll play a harder version of that planet where you don't have to use the Gyro Wing, making the whole vehicle pointless. And the other mission where the Gyro Wing is featured, you actually get rewarded for not using the Gyro Wing at all. But let's talk about the most important element here, the controls. There's a lot of controversy about the controls. A lot of people have had a very hard time with the controls, which I don't really understand because you can partially deactivate the motion controls. No, it does not deactivate completely the controls, but you're not completely forced to move around your laser with the motions. When you partially remove them, you get that ability to use the motion only when you charge a shot and you really need it. In fact, after I deactivated that, I didn't really need a lot of the motion controls or the camera that the gamepad provides. They're only really relevant when you're battling a boss battle. Throughout the missions, I never really looked down at the gamepad. Yes, I had to still do a few motions here and there when charging a shot to get the best shot possible, but I didn't really have to look down at the gamepad screen in order to do that. After playing a couple of missions, I felt really adept to the controls of the motion, so I would naturally move my gamepad with just looking at the TV screen. And not even on the open WIIU missions you really need to use the gamepad at all either. Not even to battle Star Wars or anything like that. The only real exception is the boss battles, and it actually comes in very handy. The boss battles have a rhythm, so you got a great amount of space for you to look down at the gamepad while looking at the TV later on. The real trick with the boss battles, like any video game, is that you have to learn how the boss battle moves. You can't possibly expect to nail the boss at the very first time you start battling him. The only real difficult moments was the last boss, which should be, but that's only because it was again my first time with that last boss. After a couple of tries, I knew how to take down the last boss and I was able to replay that mission multiple times. So when you start off the game, I really recommend you partially deactivate the motion controls so you can get used to them very quickly. I started out with the full motion controls and it was a little bit chaotic on the corner area, but by the second or third mission I started to get used to them, but later I saw I could deactivate them partially, and that made the whole experience simply better and more easier to pick up to. Do I love the controls? Is it a unique take on them? I actually like them a lot. I thought it was a very effective control for me for Star Fox, and it was a nice little twist to have with Star Fox finally have something creative, and I think it's definitely the best use of the gamepad finally. The only real problem that I see some people have struggled a lot with the controls is that the controls between each vehicle can be different. Although the Landmaster controls the same like the R-Wing, the Walker for example plays differently, and so does the Gyro Wing. But again, it's a matter of practice. You just figure out how they control and then you'll normally be able to play through with them. Just don't really expect to be a master of the game the very first time you pop in the game. That's not really how it works. And that's something I actually love about the game. We're going back to the old school gaming where you actually have to learn, you have to master the game, feel accomplished. But even as I said this, you don't really require a ton of days like some people that took an entire month to get used to the controls. That's actually crazy. It only took me 1 or 2 days to really nail down all the controls. Maybe it's because I played Star Fox 64 so many times, and I played so many times Star Fox Assault, and I'm a crazy Star Fox fan, so maybe I got used to them quicker that way. But regardless, I don't see you taking more than 2 days to get used to them, especially if you follow my advice of partially deactivating them right from the start. Now let's talk about the game as a whole. The game is actually a lot of fun. Some of the levels are very nicely designed. Even though a lot of the planets are planets we visited before, they do have a nice new take on them. And visually, some of the levels can be very impressive, like Titania has never looked better before. Unfortunately, for a game that's trying to emulate Star Fox 64, it actually has less planets than Star Fox 64 to discover, and overall much less exciting missions than that game. Although the game teases that you have alternate routes to take, it actually doesn't lead to a lot of new places to discover. Some of the alternate paths can be the same planet but in a more difficult mission, for example. Another alternate path leads to the asteroid fields, which you would think it's actually a very exciting level, but unfortunately it isn't. The level actually consists about flying next to the Great Fox and you have to protect the Great Fox from meteors coming. Unfortunately, this level is not very well executed. The meteors come in all shapes and forms, and you're trying to go forward to destroy the meteors, but if you go too slow, the Grey Fox might crash into you because it's going forward to the meteors as well. There's also new drone enemies that fall into the Grey Fox, and you have to go to the Grey Fox, reverse, and protect the Grey Fox by destroying these drones, but at the same time there's meteors coming, and overall it wasn't really an exciting level for me, because we're going forward in a way, but at the same time it's open space, and I feel it wasn't very well executed. And there's around 2 or 3 levels based on this concept in the whole game, which was actually very disappointing for me, because instead I would have preferred new planets or just exciting missions. And the other thing about the game is that a lot of the missions actually take place in space. There's actually not a lot of planet missions, because in addition to the Grey Fox missions I mentioned, there's a lot of sector type of levels where you don't actually go to a planet. And you might say, well, there's still a lot of levels and there's still routes to take, and it can still be fun. And yes, it's a fun game, it's a great product and worthy of the Star Fox name, but after all these years since 1997, the new Star Fox game actually has less levels than Star Fox 64. That just doesn't seem right to me. And considering how long we have to wait for a Star Fox game, that's a pretty short amount of content that we need to be satisfied with. Complaints aside, if you really like Star Fox, you should definitely try out this game. If you really want to go back to the classic Star Fox 64 style of game, but with a bit of variety and different stuff to try out, then I think you should definitely give it a shot. Especially now that the game comes with Star Fox Car, which is also a nice little exciting game, although not really fitting for the Star Fox genre, it's still a very fun game. And in the end, as a Star Fox fan, I just want more. I just want Star Fox to exceed expectations. I want Star Fox to go beyond. I want Star Fox to progress, to bring me in new planets, to bring me in new stories, new adventures for all these characters, because it's definitely a galaxy that I would like to see so much more content about. I give Star Fox Zero an 8 out of 10. Thank you for watching this video review. If you have played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time!